So again, hi everyone. My name is Anton. I will give you a little bit of introduction into who am I. Just a moment, let me share my screen now, and then confirm that you can see it. All right, I'm sharing my screen right now.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. All right. So hi again. As I said, my name is Anton. I'm a group product manager here at Wrike. I am managing a group of products which is called Enterprise, and our main goal is to make our product suit better and really work well in enterprise environments with large customers and large companies. And I've been working with Wrike for just a moment. I've been with Wrike for about 4 years now, and I started with 0 developers. Coincidentally, I had no developers, no team, and that transformed into 1 person, and then 2 people, and then that was 1 team, and then 2 teams. Right now, it's 5 teams. Our group is responsible for major integrations, security aspects, e-commerce, packaging of the product, and a lot of other things. And we're really proud about how we are transforming the product towards enterprise. Before Wrike, I was managing e-commerce at Kaspersky, and before that I worked for Microsoft and Sun Microsystems. Let me talk a little bit about Wrike in general, just to give you context around what we're talking about and where does all these stories or practices come from. So Wrike is a collaboration platform. So it's a platform where people collaborate online. It becomes really increasingly important right now in this situation with COVID, but also before that, 19,000 plus companies joined Wrike and became our customers, just because we are helping people to collaborate online and do their job better. And over 35,000 new clients registered for a trial. And many of those clients that we have in companies that we work with are really major, big companies. The names you all know, and these are not all of the names that I can name, but these are some of the names. And these are the companies that trust us with doing their online collaboration in our system. And because of that, there's a lot to kind of manage. There's a lot of platform to build, and there's a lot of product to kind of develop. That is why we have a pretty substantial product management team. It's over 30 people, 30 product managers, and it is a big kind of team to kind of manage that large of a product. And to kind of give you a context about what I'm going to talk about is that when we are talking about product management, when we're talking about what do product managers do, I always show people this funny picture. And it says that it's very easy, right? But at the same time, it's very hard. And I think that this situation in which we are all right now, where the borders are closed, when everyone is forced to work from home, where a lot of the economy has kind of turmoil and there's volatility in place, it becomes even more important to mention that product management is kind of a stressful kind of job that we'll do, and we have to kind of be aware of the crisis situations. We have to know our strategies. We have to know how to get over it. We have to know how to manage it. And I don't want you to think that this presentation or this talk was designed around COVID-19 or around the current crisis in the economy or around what's happening right now. Actually, the inception of this talk happened late 2019, maybe in September, October, when we're talking with our rsxBP about how to actually share the knowledge that we have. And the first talk around this series I made in February, when no lockdowns happened, when the problem was only in China. And this was not about that. This was about crisis in general. This was about what happens when you manage a product in a hard and challenging situation. That's why what I want to talk about today is how to manage a product in challenging times. And I want to talk about this from the perspective of your own personal strategies as a product manager. So basically, how do you approach this? What are your strategy towards that? What do you do and how do you do that? Much more about what specifically is your kind of day-to-day routine, or what do you do with some specific things. So I want to go a little bit more philosophical about that, but I will explain that in a very I will explain that in a very specific terms, in terms of we're going to talk about real situations and real life challenges. All right, so I'd like to start with the first strategy, which is based around the concepts of leadership and directive management. And let me explain why this matters. Basically, a leadership position for a product manager is a very important kind of piece of their work, because teams that are led by leaders, by natural leaders, by people who are leading their teams, are very effective. They're much more effective than any other team that you can think of. And as a rule, we can see that a leader will care for their team well-being, for their team capacity, for their team staff, and everything that's connected with their team. A leader will care for a safe environment for their team. And that is a very important point, because safety and kind of protection is something that allows people to be productive, right? And then a leader always kind of includes their team into the decision-making process. And so by doing that, they're sharing the responsibility. They're kind of removing that position that they're making the decisions for the team. They're making the decisions with the team instead. And as a result, they recognize when the team has made an accomplishment. It's not them as a manager made an accomplishment. It's the team with the leader made an accomplishment together. And these are very important points, and I'd like to talk about that, but we'll not kind of stress more about it. But there are a few important points about that. So at the same time, there is a different strategy. And there's a different strategy of management, which is something that I call directive management. So when we're talking about directive management, this is a management where the directions are given, they have to be executed. Think about army, think about a government institution or something, right? And it happens so that in software environments, in environments where innovation is imminent, directive management doesn't work, really. It works in a poor way. And there are reasons for that. There are multiple, but I will give you several. So orders or commands will be executed exactly as they said, and exactly word to word, everything will be done. But that's at best. At worst, things will be done at minimum just to avoid punishment. Then people will avoid problems that they might have if they do not do what they're told, right? And that is why they will be motivated by avoidance. They will be not motivated by achieving something. They will be trying to mitigate the problem before it started. They will be trying to do less, and they will be trying to kind of stay safe in this situation, so to say. And then because of that, innovative approach would not just appear, it would not work. And innovation will be virtually inexistent in this situation. You can continue, and I mean, we can talk about it, but definitely I think that we all know what it is and we'll know that it doesn't work. So what does it kind of have to do with crisis? Thing is that when desperate time comes, you have to do desperate measures. And sometimes these measures will mean that you will have to act quickly. You will have to make decisions very fast. And sometimes you will not have time to include your team. You will not have time to share the responsibility. You will not have the ability to be a leader in that kind of normal form. But what you will have to do instead, you will have to become a directive manager, right? You might need to act directively. And that's a conflict, right? Because you want to be a leader and you're a natural leader inside. You want to lead people. You want people to follow you, right? Your teams will follow you, not you will push them towards your goals, right? But at the same time, in a challenging environment, you're forced to act differently. So how do you manage that? I will give you a personal example. So I had a situation where there was a release, and it was a good release. It was an improvement to one of the big products in Wrike, and as it sometimes happens, we could not think about all the scenarios far ahead, right? So we thought about almost everything except this one thing. I cannot talk about which one, but one of the scenarios didn't work for one of the customers. We got a call within 2 hours from the release. And the situation was that our workflow broke. We cannot manage our work anymore. So we did not have a time to kind of think about it, to include the team, and to do all of that. We had 30 seconds. And in 30 seconds, I had to make a decision. So how to actually kind of merge this together, how to combine this together, how to do that. So the strategy that I propose, and it really works for me at least, is first of all, stay transparent and keep your integrity. What I mean by that is if you're a leader, you're open, you're talking to a team, you're explaining things, you're including them at least in the conversation, right? So keep doing that. Even if you had to change to directive management temporarily, keep doing that. And you could explain it in a very open manner. You can talk to your team and explain that this happened, I had to make these decisions, this is why I didn't include you in that, this is why I made these decisions, and this is why we have to do it this way. Second thing, when hard times come, you need help. You need people to kind of stand back to back with you. And it is okay to show your vulnerability in that and to ask for help because you need that help, frankly. You're not that powerful without a team. You're basically nothing. If you ask someone, what does a product manager do without a team? Well, the answer is there could be a roadmap, that could be a description of the product, that could be anything, a presentation, but customers won't see that. So you need help from your team. And if you do that in terms of help and you're saying like, okay, we're doing directive management right now. I'm telling you what to do because we're in a crisis. But at the same time, you're helping me or we're helping each other to overcome this. Then in this case, this might make your team actually stronger. And I truly believe in that. And again, I want to stress it again and again. Explain this change. And explain that this is not because you're not interested in other people's opinions. This is not because you're not kind of engaged. And this is because the situation calls for it. And if you have valid reasons for that, and this is very important, then you can convince your team that this is the right thing to do. But remember that if this is an excuse to kind of make it easier, because it's very easy to come and say, you're doing that. And if it's not a crisis, then you will not be able to convince your team. So it all depends on whether or not you have valid reasons. And I believe that all of us in crisis do have valid reasons, and we will be able to have a valid and healthy communication with our team. So honesty is always the best policy. I'll be open, be be engaged in an open discussion, and all of that will really work, and maybe will even make your team stronger. The second strategy I'd like to talk about is professional boundaries. It's a little bit different. We're shifting gears right now. So let me talk about what it is. So we all have boundaries as people, and basically our boundaries define who we are. That's a term from psychology, but it applies very well to professional work, and it becomes a problem in a crisis, in a hard time, in a situation where everything is challenging. Your professional boundaries experience additional pressure. And let me explain why. So if we look at the typical product management job, right, like all we do, then we have a very wide responsibility span in terms of we are responsible for a lot of things, and our job description might be very long and vague, include a lot of stuff, right? And then our thinking range, so in terms of what do we see in our horizon, is also very high and wide, because we're thinking from the company mission top down to the stories in the backlog and specifications and sometimes technical details. And we cannot omit that top part with the company mission, because that way we cannot steer our roadmap towards that, right? And third thing is that we have a very strong sense of ownership, because a good product manager is the owner, right? We own our product, and that is why we can make it better. And so in this way, there is this saying that a product manager is a mini CEO of their product. If you think about it, the answer to the question, what does the product manager do, is everything. Everything you need to do to make your product successful, that's what product manager does. But all of that is right, all of that is correct, but in hard times, in a crisis, or in challenging environment, this can transform to an inflamed sense of responsibility. Your sense of responsibility can be so big that you might think or start feeling this way, that you're responsible for everything. And that's what I'm saying right now is very personal, because I've experienced that, and I know that it has to be controlled. You have to do something about it. We'll talk about it. And this, again, funny picture says about, I'm responsible for everything that goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, I feel responsible for that, right? But can we be responsible for everything that goes wrong? And what happens to us if we feel responsible for everything that goes wrong? That's a challenging situation in its own, right? So when you're in a crisis, there's a lot of pressure. Risks blow up. A lot of things go wrong, right? And if you look at the kind of diagram that I've done, let's say we have a circle where it's me. It's my own things that belong to me, things that I'm definitely controlling, like my car, for example. I control whether or not I buy it or sell it or drive it or not, right? So this is mine. And then there's things that I can change. I can influence the roadmap of the team, and I share it with my team. I can do the presentation. I can move that product initiative. I can vote for something. This is what I can change. But then there are things that I cannot change at all. Circumstances, COVID-19, economy, I don't know, hackers intruding your system. These are the things you cannot change at all. These are the things that you absolutely cannot control, and they're very far away from you. But if we're responsible for everything, we're starting to feel like all of it is our responsibility, and that's a problem. So my suggestion is to very literally draw a boundary where something that you can change ends. If you cannot change that, if you cannot change circumstances, explain to yourself, and say it out loud or even write it on the piece of paper. This is what I can change. This is what is circumstance, and this is what comes to me. And this is what I react to. But this is not my responsibility. And that includes, by the way, such things as if I'm managing a part of the product, I'm not managing the other part of the product. And I cannot impact that. And I should not impact that because I have to be focused on what I can change and what I really foster and what I care for. And so personal strategy in terms of boundaries would be that I know as a fact what I was responsible for before this crisis emerged. And very literally, you can make a list of the things that you were responsible for. And let's say I was responsible for the team's progress along the goals, along the roadmap, stuff like that. And then when a challenging time comes, the times have changed. So the things have changed, the situation has changed, and the new circumstances evolved, right? And then say to yourself that you cannot change the circumstances. And now our responsibility changes. So in this way, we can look at it as right now I'm responsible for stabilizing things, for safety and security of my own product, of my team, of things I'm responsible for, and then for turning crisis into normal. Let's imagine that we have a situation. This is a synthetic situation where, for example, you have a huge crash of your storage. If storage crashes, sometimes it really is catastrophic. And disaster recovery will work for quite some time. You will have to spend a lot of time kind of recovering from the situation. You will have a lot of mitigation with your clients, with your customers, with people who are using your service. So there's a lot of things that you will have to do, right? All of that is not your responsibility in terms of it happened because it happened, but it is your responsibility now to stabilize it, right? And it has nothing to do with your roadmap. Your roadmap goes out the window immediately as it happens. And so that is why it makes no sense to worry about the roadmap. And if you make it transparent enough, everyone will agree with you. And it is very important to say that our plan has changed now. And it is very important to say how. And we will talk about it in the next section. So how to change your plan when something unexpected happens. However, that doesn't mean that we have to drag our cartwheel into different directions. For those of you who are not Russian, this is a kind of a Russian proverb, which talks about a cartwheel that is powered by 3 different animals. And these animals really kind of don't have any alignment. I think that after stabilization and after we did kind of the emergency things, we still have to align to global goals. And that way, this situation won't happen. And then naturally, it comes down to how do we change our plan and what happens with our plans and roadmaps when crisis emerges. And I think that this is where our discussion becomes very practical, because right now in this crisis, a lot of the priorities have changed, right? But do we understand exactly how and what exactly is the change, how it's going to work and all that? So crisis will reset your plan. Everything will change, and it will not be kind of actual anymore. So all of your goals, targets, plans, timelines, commitments, all of it can go out the window, as I said. And I suggest the following framework for crisis prioritization. There are 3 areas that you can focus on. And first of all, this is kind of the tactical, a tactical mindset. So this is the tactical span. This is what you're doing right now. And the first thing is stabilization. By that, I mean that if the situation is unstable, if, for example, crash of your server causes crash of your further servers, or degradation of the service can lead to degradation of the whole service altogether, to a shutdown, then this is where you have to do stabilization. This is where you have to make the situation at least stable, so it is to prevent further damage. But the second thing is safety and security. Why it is after stabilization? Why is security after such important thing as stabilization? Why not security first? There's a very strong reason for that. If your situation is unstable, it's even more dangerous than having a security hole or something. You have to kind of stabilize your situation and then care for safety. And then you do impact relief. So basically, when something happened, when you lost data on where you have to do a backup restore. If you don't have a backup, then you have to do customer communication or something. If you have a security problem, you have to make sure that the data is saved, all the passwords are reset and all that. Thank God in Wrike we never had that, but still we have to be prepared for that. So that's the tactical layer of what you can do. Then the second layer is strategic. So basically it's a long-term vision of things that you can do and should do in crisis. And first of all, that's do the root cause analysis and do the fixes. Sounds obvious, but oftentimes this is not done. If something happened, it had a reason. And by fixing this reason, you can, of course, prevent this from happening again, and you can make it so that your next crisis will be less severe or it won't happen at all, right? But only after that, you have to do systematic changes. So there are changes to do the whole thing, right? So as an example, if you do not have a redundancy policy in your data storage, I'm talking about data storage a lot as an example, because this is something where the crisis will definitely lead to catastrophic consequences. So then the systematic changes can happen. If we're talking about COVID-19, for example, we can talk about systematic changes in terms of how do we approach work in general for it to be suited for both office and remote work. Whatever happens, we're always ready if we do have this platform underneath it. I'll give you an example. Wrike is an online collaboration platform, and as all companies, we do eat our own food, right? So we're eating our own product in terms of we're using it for development of the product, for managing marketing campaigns, for managing people, for doing all of it, right? And that is why, because it's in the cloud, when pandemic happened, we all switched to home work, remote work, and all of it remained in the cloud, accessible. And so none of the data was lost. None of the communication links were broken. Everything remained as it was. And that really kind of was a systematic change that was done way before. And if that is not done right now in your company, that is something that you could do to prevent this from happening in the future. But only after those stabilization, safety, impact relief, and root cause analysis steps. And then you're building a safety net. So that's kind of your redundancy plan. So to give you an example, I don't want to talk about storage anymore. To give an example, if we talk about intrusion, for example, if we talk about security for the online system, we don't want any intrusion, right? But it is impossible to prevent it 100%, right? Because the code is changing, everything is changing. Our attackers are using new ways to kind of sneak into our system and all that. But what we can do is we can implement intrusion prevention systems. We can implement analytic systems that analyze the data and logs and then report suspicious activities to us, stuff like that. But that's only systematic changes are done. And then the third and the last layer is the stable priorities. The stable priorities include all of the things that we were doing before the crisis. So these are our goals from the stable time. So remember February, remember December. These are the priorities we had way back then, right? They're different from what we have right now because of the tactical and strategic changes that we're doing to avoid this crisis that we have right now, right? All of us. And these are your third priority. And then all of the approved plans, roadmaps, timelines, as a result from these goals, all of that is our third layer, including promises and commitments. So I suggest that if you're in the hard crisis, if you're in a situation where you want to step up and say, okay, this is the red mode, then you have to draw the line right there under tactical and strategic. And there are few valid reasons for that. Because if you only do your stable priorities, so something you had before, and your tactical kind of things to mitigate your crisis, then that damage that has to be done will not be alleviated as good, because your focus is still on the stable priorities. So imagine I was building a product and my team was developing that product and we had a roadmap. So let's take Wrike calendars, for example. And we were doing Wrike calendars, and then something happens, something really kind of requiring our attention. And so in this situation, we're still developing our calendars. We're still doing a tool for online road mapping and mapping tasks, projects on the calendar. And on top of that, we're adding some of the damage control on the tactical level. Our team is still focused on the calendar. Our team is still busy for like 99% or maybe 100% on that. Our tactical efforts will not be effective. And then we will probably resolve the tactical situation. So we will probably mitigate the fire, and the fire will be extinguished, but it will come again. We didn't do anything to mitigate it in the future. We omitted that. We did not have that second layer. And that damage will multiply, because once it's done, the next time is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. You want to avoid that. And so the other approach, which will also fail, will be to do stable and strategic priorities. So that would mean still do the calendar and do the systematic changes, do the safety net, all that. So if we do that, then we will not relieve the damage that is done tactically, and the damage will multiply itself, even in this particular situation. And then what could happen because of that, because we didn't mitigate the situation, then you will have domino effect, because one thing will lead to another thing, and that will cause further damage, right? So it's a big problem. And then your results out of the stable priorities, so my development of the calendar, for example, will be hindered by that, because we have a lot of damage happening all the time. So that doesn't work. And then the third and the most probably popular approach that we might try is to do all of it. So keep doing calendars, extinguish the fire, and do the safety net, mitigation, root cause analysis. Most probably you allocated all of your resources even before something happened, right? So remember what happened with your teams before the pandemic, right? All of them were busy 100%, right? If we're doing something new, if we're adding 2 more priorities, like extinguish that fire right now, so do the root cause analysis and fix things systematically, that's like 3 times the work. You can stretch what your teams can do, but only temporary and up to an extent. You cannot stretch it infinitely, right? So that's a problem. And there's a law of conservation of energy, right? So you cannot fit all of it into one bucket. And at the end of the day, if you have all the priorities at once, you have 0 priorities. You have chaos. That just doesn't work, and we as product managers know that. And the last strategy I want to talk about is burnout. This is probably the least kind of product management thing from one point of view, but at the same time, this is probably the most product management thing, because we PMs can often experience burnout, and in product management culture, and it is a known thing to happen. There are a few reasons for that. So first of all, we do have a sense of ownership, But again, remember we were talking about that sense of ownership, which in crisis can lead to an inflated sense of ownership, an inflated sense of responsibility. We can start feeling responsible for everything. That's a lot of responsibility, so it's a blessing in disguise in this case. And then the environment is changing, even without the crisis, without the pandemic, without the hackers that attack us, without all of that, it is already changing frequently. Our competitive situation changes frequently. The market changes frequently. Our customers are growing. Our requirements are changing. So everything is very, very volatile. So that's that creates an environment where we have to live in. And then there's high level of uncertainty, right? This is a natural cause of that, but still it is there. And with that, we have a wide area of responsibility. We are responsible for a lot of things, and ultimately we're responsible for the result. And on top of that, we're doing a lot of communication, right? So basically, communication is probably one of the main tools and instruments that the product manager actually uses. Talking to people, convincing your stakeholders, talking and listening to your customer, understanding them, and getting into negotiation with them. This is a lot of talking, a lot of communication, and that comes with an emotional toll. And then with the teams and with stakeholders, we're using our mental state, the state in which we are, what we believe in, as a tool, as an instrument as well, which is also very expensive in terms of how we are allocating our emotional resource. So that is why burnout is no surprise for a product manager, even in the stable times. But then what happens when the crisis comes? And I suggest looking at this like that. I don't think personally that there is work-life balance. And you might think that this guy's crazy. I think that once you own things, once you're a product manager, what you own becomes your life, and your product becomes part of your life. And that way, we have a life balance. We have two parts of our life. One part is work, one part is our product, and the other part is our relationships with loved ones, with our family, with what we do, and with the world. But there are two wings which help you fly. Both are life. There's no work. And you need to identify burnout really early and better kind of be prepared for it. So there are a few things that that are kind of markers for burnout. So basically, subjectively, you might feel that everything is very bad. The situation is very kind of unfavorable, and everything is not not in order that you would like to see it. But if you look at the reality, if you're honest with it, it is not that bad. And if you see that, this is definitely burnout. If you're cynical towards your job inside, it doesn't mean that you're acting like that. But if you feel cynical, if you don't feel attached anymore, if you're if you start departing from that, this is burnout. If you have accomplishments and you have wins and you have won customers and you have won great releases with great metrics, and you do not feel this as rewarding, this is burnout. And you can read a lot about that. Important point is that if that correlates with pressure, so basically the higher the pressure, the higher these things happen, the more they happen. And if you go away, like for example on a vacation, and you feel temporary relief, that's definitely burnout. So to prevent burnout, there are a few things. First of all, switching contexts. Our brain is overloaded when it is doing the same thing all over again. That's why we sleep. And you need some sleep from that part of life, which is your work. And this is hard because if you are in a crisis and if the situation is hard, if you will just do something else, just go for a walk, for example, you will have a hard time just switching your brain to something else. If you don't, well, this is really great. But if you're like me and you're emotionally invested in your work, this is going to be hard. So you need something to kind of force this. And to force this, you make a forced switch. There are a few things to do forced switch. There are good things to do forced switch and bad things to do forced switch. Definitely, I would not recommend using something like alcohol, for example, which will force you to switch, but that's a depressant, and it will actually kind of suppress the brain rather than stimulate it to do something good. But you can do sport, for example. All of the physical activities, like building something with your hands, playing an instrument, whatever it is, a piano or guitar or whatever, doing sport really forces your mind to change. Because when you're doing something, your brain is focused on what you're doing. You can do other ways of forced switch, such as guided meditation or things like that, but that requires some experience to learn. Sport does not. If you just go for a run, you will switch. You will need to find some place to rest or some ways to rest. There are a few strategies. So you need to have an active rest. So going for a vacation with a beach, in my opinion, won't work. Because you will lay down there and think about your crisis, right? So that doesn't work. But if it's walking in the mountains, for example, if you have a hike, that works because that's active activity, it's far away, and if you can do it uninterrupted, that's good. It is impossible probably to have a slack off all the time in your vacation, but if you can keep your commitment to minimum and just respond to those things that you cannot miss, well, I can tell you, even in the hardest situations, it's all going to be good. And at the end of the day, you have to have your personal well-being as a priority. This is important, and that's not only important for you and for me and for all of us. That's also important for the company and for the business. And that's the very important and very interesting part. So basically, our mental state, the way we feel, has direct impact on how we perform. The better we feel, the better product managers we are, right? And at the end of the day, our mental state is also an asset for our business. And if it is, then we have to prioritize our well-being above some other things, right? We have to do prioritization in there. And sometimes we have to prioritize our well-being above all else, above everything. If it is required by the situation, if it is required by how you feel, do it. Because otherwise, you will burn out, that's not going to be efficient, the product management work is not going to be done, right? So what's the use of that? And it is a very important and interesting thing that I was thinking about, that if you don't include yourself and your well-being, your own time, your rest, your sport, all of that in your prioritization, if you don't have a backlog that contains your own and then work, then that's part of your own scope, which includes your product and your life. But this part about life doesn't have an owner, because an owner, a product manager, comes to a scope and prioritizes it, right? So basically, you have to prioritize it. That's ownership. And to sum up, first of all, if the situation is hard, maintain leadership. Even in the hardest times, even in the hardest situations, you may get good results if you still remain yourself and remain a leader and explain to your team why do you have to make decisions in a directive way if you have to. Then clearly identify, maybe written form, maybe as a diagram or something, what you are responsible for, what's out of the scope of your responsibility, what you can impact, what is out of your impact. And then keep your focus on your responsibility only. Just consciously make an effort and be inside that circle. That will help you kind of limit the anxiety that might happen. And in hard situations, do extreme prioritization. It is not like any other prioritization. It's very different. As I said, sometimes we have to throw out all the roadmap out the window, but temporarily to alleviate the crisis, right? And your tactical and systematic things should be your top priority, and then everything else, including your previous roadmap. If you have resources to allocate to your previous roadmap after that, no problem, prioritize that. And as soon as your crisis becomes less and less severe, you will allocate more and more time to that. Your roadmap will return. And then prevent burnout. I'm saying prevent because when it already happened, it's really, really hard to get out of it. I had such cases. I consciously had a battle with it. And it was successful, but that's really hard. And I suggest, like, see the early signs. Don't let it happen. And then you have to think about this, not only in terms of how you feel, but also in terms of how your team feels. Because with all this COVID-19, for example, it is a known fact that burnout risk is growing, because working from home is really, really hard. It's harder to work from home. And my own personal estimation is that at least 30% harder than it is to do the same job from the office. I've never thought I would say that, but this seems to be true. And that is why, if you care for your team members, you have to explain that to them. You have to maybe kind of provide them some guidance in that term. And then this is all because without an effective team, we will have to have a really hard time, right? We will not be able to deal with the crisis we have, right? That's it. Thank you very much. And I'm not sure what about the time. I think I'm over time, right?